first of all, the digital ID allows you to be able to identify people. We take your fingerprints, we also take a photograph. As you've seen in the country, we have installed cameras in many different locations, and really the crime rate has gone down, even terrorism, because we've been able to thwart either attempts, or we can see in advance some of the things that are ongoing. There's also the issue you're raising of maybe hate speech or fake news, or many of the things that
radicalization, yes.
And in a lot of ways, these are not necessarily new things that technology is introducing. I think technology is just amplifying and emphasizing, actually. These are areas that have existed. People have been hiding behind some form of anonymity. But you'll find as technology has continued, and the law enforcement agencies, the courts and all that have become more and more tech savvy.
Yes.
It's been harder and harder to hide behind technology, where you're saying people don't know who you are and so on. And we've had cases where now we've been able to jail people. We've been able to show where even corruption has happened, the audit trail on how people have actually used money. So technology is also, emphasizing and showing, what are the different aspects that need to be managed and dealt with. And so I think we have more control with technology, because the audit trails are there. You can be able to see where people are than we had before. So I think we're in a better situation. We're creating a lot more opportunities, because people now have a lot more trust. There's a lot more safety and security in the things that we're doing. But we continue to ensure that we're vigilant at all times, because even when you have those systems and those cameras, they require people to be behind them, who are going to be monitoring and understanding what's going on, who are going to be checking, this person has come to this place 5 times, why are they here, what is going on? So you need to also have the human side of many of the things that we're implementing.
Okay. And of course, that will feed into the question of infrastructure. If we have the identity, also we need a robust, of course, critical infrastructure for the digital space. And you're part of the African leaders and influencers who came together to discuss practical ways of bringing the Moonshot vision to life and building the inclusive digital future all across the continent. You can actually help us to understand how will this help address the spawning digital divide problem as well? Because we know the internet penetration, that is a different kettle of fish altogether, right? Because I think we're not really growing as we should as far as internet penetration is concerned.
I think I'm not unhappy with the pace at which we are growing, because sometimes you can grow too fast and things break. So right now, as we are growing, the robustness of the infrastructure, the companies, the networks are actually quite key. As government, we have spent our time ensuring that most of the innovations and most of the drive is actually done by private sector and not by government itself. Mm-hmm. So building of the towers, building of the infrastructure, 4G, 5G, and so on, really we want to see that done through the private sector. It requires that we move faster in terms of creating the awareness, educating our youth and others to ensure that they're involved. And really I commend the central bank and the partners from Singapore for this kind of fascinating and great event.
A round of applause.
Yeah. People have been sometimes questioning central banks that central bank is not looking at the new technologies and new laws because they're advising us on things like Bitcoin. But look at what they're doing. They're creating a platform and giving so much opportunity to Africa, to Kenyans, to be able to innovate and work from there. Where I agree with you that we're being left behind is that in some of these new cutting-edge areas, we have our youth being used to develop. So for instance, we have people who work online, and we have some of the top young people working on, say, autonomous vehicles. They're the ones describing the vehicles, what they're seeing, just coming out of Nairobi here. They work for many of the tech companies in Silicon Valley, but they give a lot of information. So they digitize, they transcribe, they translate, they do many things. They're called, freelancers of that industry. What's happening is that with the technology and now with artificial intelligence, a lot of the language, a lot of the systems that are being put in are not necessarily Kenyan or African. So I think most people here either speak Google or Siri, with your iPhone or with your Google phone. And so over time, you begin to have this intelligence divide, where if Siri cannot understand your accent, then you're going to have challenges talking even to your TV or your phone over time. So we need to start looking at how to invest in that area. We'll lose also in our languages. We lose even in our culture, because if all these things are going online and we're translating into new ways of doing things, you will find a lot of our culture and a lot of things are carried in language. I don't know if Microsoft are here, although I got permission from them. For their, Bing, which is their search engine, they have 2 African languages, Swahili and Afrikaans. But they also have 2 dialects of Klingon, for those who know Klingon. Klingon is what they spoke in Star Trek when they met those aliens. That's the language they spoke. But we have over 2,000 languages in Africa where people speak, where you have over 1 million speakers. So it's a huge number. But if we're not careful, we will lose a lot. I like to use the example of Kimeumana. How do you translate that into whichever language, into English? So if we're all going to be speaking either Google or Siri, which is from Apple, or even Watson from IBM, if that's the only language we'll speak, then we're all going to be speaking a very, I would say, blunt language. Kimeumana and many of the other languages we have, they bring out the color. That's what life is about. So we need to make sure that divide is not there. But it's not the responsibility of those international companies to do this. I think it's our responsibility to develop and to build that. And as government, we're investing heavily to ensure in those areas we're investing, and that our young people are aware they're investing. And as I said, I'm very pleased this is what Central Bank is doing. This is amazing.
Thank you. But also it raises the questions of interoperability, where now, yes, we say we have these particular devices, but they cannot interface, they cannot read each other. And we have now the spirit of integration within East Africa and Africa entirely. But we cannot, the services cannot, read each other. How then do we come up with proper framework on how we can try and make sure that at least this is addressed?
So I think this has 2 sides. One is the actual infrastructure. So Kenya has its own national fiber backbone, so does Uganda, Tanzania. We need to find a way of ensuring that all those backbones are connected. Right now, most backbones are the private sector backbones that are connected, and they are working together. So you'll find many companies that are across different countries that are providing these services. The second one is on the policy level, and ensuring that the policy allows the correct standards to actually be used. So you set policies, like now the ISO standards that have been set up should be used across the whole continent, so that we all share in the same way, so that any service being offered in any of the countries, you can actually be able to interoperate. I think for this function or for this event, mobile money interoperability is probably the single biggest discussion that's going on. Already it's been a challenge within the countries. So where you have many of the different operators, each of them have created their own innovations. And the minute they open their wallet to others, or their services to the other networks, then they lose some of their advantage. So getting the right policies that ensure you still have the right competition, but that there'll be ease of use for consumers. I mean, if I want to send money from one network to another, from one person to another, it should be seamless. I shouldn't have to move, hold multiple SIM cards and so on. So in Kenya so far, we've had great progress. The central bank, with our ministry, have also worked closely to ensure that the mobile operators are able to have an environment where you can have the mobile money interoperability. In the Northern Corridor Integration Project, where you have some of the East African countries, our presidents have directed the central banks to come together with the communications regulators, so that now you can see the mobile money interoperability across the different countries. It's a process, it will take time, the same way roaming and other things took time, but I think we are headed in the right direction, and that will work soon.
So we know that in this epoch of time we're struggling with terrorism and of course violent extremism as well. And there has been a discussion about making sure that also the digital infrastructure becomes a critical infrastructure? I don't know that conversation where it is at right now from the government perspective.
There's a critical infrastructure bill that is currently in process. I think it's going through public participation. That will ensure that most of the infrastructure that we require for communications, even water, roads, and all the key infrastructure is actually going to be protected. And it's not only just terrorism. I mean, there's also just misuse. If you remember the old telephone copper cables, they used to be stolen all the time, or you have cable cuts, or all these things are going to be in a sense protected because they are critical.
I'll be asking myself, where are these cables and the call boxes? You remember them, right? Does anyone remember these call boxes we used to have and the cables as well, the disposal of assets as well? I think that's another question as well, but sorry for butting your thought.
No, that's okay. So I'm just saying that we've looked at all that, and it's part of the process. So once the bill is now becomes an act and becomes law, then most of this infrastructure will be protected.
Right.
So that then the key thing, as I said, we want private sector to be the ones driving and leading our economy. And if they're going to do that, then we must protect the investment. If you put up a tower in a certain town and it's brought down, then that's a cost. Who's going to pay for that cost? It's not even the insurers and so on. So as government, we ensure that we'll have the right laws of protecting, as well as making sure if anybody damages, then they pay for it.
I had mentioned the moonshot vision or the project. I think also World Bank is in this as well. You can all just give us a feedback of what is happening with the moonshot vision in terms of trying also to make sure that we have proper infrastructure in Africa. I think they had projected by 2022 or 2023, then we should be having at least some very good conducive sort of infrastructure to be able, to roll on with the conversation about the digital economy.
So I think you're asking about the World Bank's digital moonshot.
Yes.
They've set aside about $50 billion, which is to be spent within Africa for just getting, again, you have the single digital market I was talking about. They have found, like many of the governments, and the governments have been bringing this forward, that first of all, unemployment is one big problem that we have. Technology and the digital space is one area where we can create millions and millions of jobs. So, they've seen where the governments are going in that area, the fact that we need the digital ID. So what the World Bank is doing is setting up in each country a method of being able to accelerate. A moonshot is being able to move things very quickly so that we can have this infrastructure put in place, awareness put in place, and you can see the single digital market coming to fruition. E-commerce is a very big area. If you look at how China has developed, 35% of the GDP right now is e-commerce. So, and they're in the trillions of dollars of the GDP. So if we can do the same within the continent and actually have e-commerce also drive many of the economies and countries that we have, then we were going to see both the jobs and many of the opportunities created without people having to move from the rural areas into cities so that they can be able to improve their livelihoods. So what the World Bank is doing is helping us in providing the facilities that we need to be able to invest in that infrastructure, invest in that awareness, and do that at a regional level so that we can see that growth.
Right. I'll be remiss if we don't really talk about digital currency before we gravitate to smart cities. And I know there's a task force, the cryptocurrency task force, that I think right now they should be wrapping up on the report. And people are eagerly waiting on this particular report. And I hear also some people are moving to court to try and make sure that, you push the envelope and release the report. Where is the report?
So Governor, it is called the Distributed Ledgers and Artificial Intelligence Task Force, not cryptocurrency. We're not trying to provoke. So we'll see what they will do. They've actually finalized the report. We'll be launching it soon. But really what they've been trying to see is all these new technologies, evolving technologies, blockchain, distributed ledgers, will allow us, in the country, I would say still one of our biggest challenges is corruption. With blockchain, we can be able to ensure that we have records that are immutable, records that will actually show what is going to happen at any, who came in, who did what, so that it will help us in terms of making sure we have a very transparent and open system of the way things are done. As I mentioned with artificial intelligence, you can imagine now if we're going to translate all our languages, the number of jobs that are being created. For instance, right now we've got a project with the judiciary where we will be transcribing all the proceedings from all the different courtrooms. There's about 640, so that the judges and the magistrates will receive a full report digitized of all the proceedings that were happening, so they don't have to keep writing and writing, as they listen to everybody. Sometimes they forget to write some of the things, and if some things are left out, the outcome may not be the correct one.
Yes.
So this digitization is going to make sure that things are a lot better. So the task force role was to really tell us as a country, how can we benchmark and set ourselves to ensure we're not left behind. So other than looking at those areas, they're looking at, for instance, also the manufacturing sector. As a country, we are importing close to 50 million devices every 2 years. As we move now to the Internet of Things, we'll be moving to over 500 million sensors and devices. That's huge in terms of foreign exchange, as the amount that will be going out. We need to find ways of being able to start manufacturing and assembling a lot of these devices and sensors here in the country. So these are all the things that I believe they are putting forward for us. I don't want to preempt the whole report, but they will announce and then reveal to us the many things that they feel we should be doing, including what their view is in terms of a digital currency for the country.
And I know that has been also a very ticklish issue, the digital currency, but I think also worldwide, where we have some of these unicorns, they're coming up with a digital currency. We know Facebook with the Libra right now, a contentious issue, and I think today they're before the Congress to try and thrash out that particular matter, and how sometimes you are not actually putting up, maybe the headquarters like the Libra right now in your own country. I think they've chosen, is it Switzerland?
Right.
Yeah. That can be another challenge. But do you think, from your own assessment, and I know there's a whole issue about the regulatory framework that also has to be put in place, is that the way that we should be going?
I think we need to be prudent in everything that we do. I think the governor said, as far as cryptocurrencies are concerned, we don't have to be the first. And I added and said that we don't have to be the last. We can be somewhere in between to ensure that we're not being left behind. There are many people who have gone into these cryptocurrencies and made money, but there is almost equivalent number who have gone in and lost money.
Yes.
So central bank is saying, be cautious about these things that are coming in. They're not regulated. We're not fully conversant with what is happening. I think that's a very prudent way of addressing this area. So if someone wants to go into an area where they're on the cutting edge and therefore they want to take the risk, then that's their risk that they're taking. The discussions we've had with central bank is creating what is called like a sandbox, where we can actually test some of this. And I think some of the exhibitors that we've had,
Yes.
that we've seen here, they're already dealing with some of these technologies and ensuring that even some of the cryptocurrencies, Ethereum and others, can actually be used to ensure that you have the smart contract and the things that are required that will improve the country. So for me, I'm one who pushes for digital currency in a very big way. But I'm always very happy that the governor is on that side telling people, but also be very careful because of all the pitfalls that can be there. But in reality, M-Pesa is, I think the world's leading right now digital currency. It's pegged right now fully to the Kenyan shilling. And so we have learned, and I don't think it would be easy to be overtaken, but many of the companies out there are beginning to see what the mobile money and digital currencies can do, and so they're investing, and I hope that we will actually be competitive and we'll be able to be part of that whole innovation. And I think today I'm very happy to have seen many of those innovations
Yes.
that are happening here that are in line with what the rest of the world is doing. So I'm confident we won't be left behind.
Right, and of course the world is moving also towards integrated reporting. It is no longer about just the profit margins that you declare, but still it's about the planet, the people, and the profits. I've heard you mentioning that yes, we import a lot of gadgets and devices. My worry is in the broader spectrum of digital economy, how also are we prepared for the disposal of some of these gadgets that will be somewhat archaic, maybe in the next decade or so?
You'll be happy to know that in Embakasi, where Computers for Schools is, they actually have set up an e-waste management center where they actually have the process of disposing of what can be disposed of here in the country, and anything that can't be, they're actually sending out overseas. It's ISO certified by the ISO standards group. So we've already gone in that direction, and NEMA and others have already put a lot of the requirements in place to ensure that this e-waste is not going to become a big problem for us. So I think there we are okay. One of the areas that I left out that I think was also important to just address is that technology is also pushing us towards people betting a lot. And so right now an area of serious subject is all these betting companies that are raking in billions using the technology. But a lot of our young people are suffering because some are spending their school fees on betting and then they don't get anything. So it's really interfering with them. So these are some of the challenges that also introduction of technology is doing. And the caution that is being put in, and what you're seeing Ministry of Interior working on to ensure that this area is managed is important. But overall, as I mentioned, the audit trails and the management of all these infrastructure, services, whatever is required is something that we as a ministry are very concerned about. We're working as one government so as to ensure whether it's enforcement on e-waste management or use of these technologies for things that are not appropriate then or even illegal, then they are stopped. Yeah.
So that also acts as a segue now to the next session, where we can look, not really the next session, but the topic. We can look at the smart cities as well. When we're talking about the PPP, I know we're coming up with green cities as well. You can actually just give us an inkling of where we are as a country as far as technopolis are concerned.
So I would say, I think for my ministry, the key one is Konza Technopolis, which so far has made great strides. They now have over 80 billion shillings for this financial year that they're investing to make sure the horizontal infrastructure is in place. But the key thing is that the infrastructure they're putting in place is first world, is first class. So they're creating, for instance, the service tunnels where all the cables will pass. The kind of waste management systems that they are putting in place are world class. So all these are going to be a showcase for the rest of the country, so that you can come and see how you can actually be able to build your city in a way that is very efficient. So the building that we've set up, we're looking at even how the glass can also be primarily using solar, so that you're powering the place in a way that is more efficient. As a country, we've moved significantly in terms of green energy, but we want to make sure that even the cities, the street lighting, most of those are using either wind or solar, so that you're not having to pollute the environment, and ensure that we're moving forward. In terms of creating jobs, we are looking at ensuring we have high-tech jobs. So we have the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology that we're setting up jointly with the Korean KAIST Institute, that will allow us to have master's, PhD and above courses, so that people can come and invest heavily in technology and be able to understand all the things that we need to move, so that our country is also at the forefront of innovations, both in how we manage our cities, how we manage our companies, governments, and even the education sector, health sector. So many of those are being set up within the Konza Technopolis. We currently are in discussions with others, Dubai, where we can see how we can partner on how to build and expand in the project. So far it is operating and going on well. And really I encourage people to visit. You might find that this is the time you should be investing, because later on it will become difficult to invest. Now is the time. I'm really happy that the Makueni women, Asako, came together. They've raised their money and they're putting up some buildings there. So, musichelewe.
So we have the first mile, we have the middle mile, we have also the last mile, and the invisible mile. These are just different phases of installation. Kindly, would you just take us through briefly? Let's pick up especially on the invisible mile, where we're talking about policies and regulations, things like spectrum come into these fees and taxes. How prepared are we as well?
Oh, there we're prepared. I think our regulator has been working very hard in ensuring that we have a robust environment. I know many people who still question that one of the operators has the lion's share of the market, but that's because of their ability to innovate. I think the others did not move as fast, so we're not going to punish them for that. I know the members of parliament are really looking at this in a big way. They're even looking at how to split companies. I think those are all healthy debates that we can have to ensure that we have an economy that is competitive, an economy that allows for investment to be protected, an economy that allows for innovation and growth in that area. So we're heavily investing in ensuring we have the right policies in place. Right now, I think the most topical, and especially with the Huduma number, was the Privacy and Data Protection Bill, which is already at the National Assembly. This bill is going to ensure, and for many people here who are in the fintech space, they will be affected. Because we're looking at how do you store citizen data, personally identifiable data. If it's a credit reference bureau, I need to know that this is the information that the credit reference bureau has on me. So you should have access to that information. And if, for instance, I've paid my loans, then I expect that that data will be updated. At the moment, the privacy is not being treated in the way that citizens expect. So the law is going to become very clear how long you can hold the data, how you can process, how you can share that data, what it will cost. So we'll soon be having a data commissioner whose responsibility is going to be ensuring compliance. At the moment, most of the compliance and legal requirements are on the government. But we require the private sector to also adhere to these rules. The general privacy regulations in Europe, the GDPR, those are just as important as the ones we're putting in place, so that we can ensure that even internationally, when we're working with different companies and countries, then they will be happy for us to hold their citizen data. For instance, with the GDPR in Europe, airlines could have problems if they're not storing their data in a certain way. Then those airlines may be blacklisted from taking on their customers or their passengers. So a lot of these are areas we're looking at. You mentioned the critical infrastructure,
yes.
Computer and cybercrime bill, that act now that is already been enacted, and you've seen a lot of the activities even in the legal process, ensuring that we're even covering the issues of fake news. I won't go into the numbers of things that come up. I saw myself also on fake news, but I won't. Me, I'm a hacker. I don't do those other things. But so you'll find even those we've put in laws in place, so that people can't just come up and accuse you of things and say all sorts of things that are not necessarily true. So many of those, including the language policy, very critical. But I have to say that the support we have from the president is awesome, because it allows us to really move fast, even the budgets that are required. And because we have his support, then the country is actually moving very well.
Right, thank you. And so there are so many of us also who are driving this conversation with me, and I can see some rush of questions that are posted here on the app. Yes. We have Majid Bazabas, who's asking, do you think a consolidated source of digital data for all citizens that is accessible to financial service providers and other decision makers in the private sector is a public good that the government should invest in?
Is it a trick question? Because that's what Huduma number is. Huduma number is a single source of truth of citizen information, which the government will protect, but allows the same way the integrated population system, the IPRS system is used, where you can actually verify who is who. That's in place. So that's exactly what we're working on. And there are people who were not for it before, but I think now we have more or less universal support in the country to be able to provide that single source of truth. it's one that will ensure that this industry, for instance, will just thrive. So you don't have to really worry about, identifying people, because with biometrically, you'll be able to identify somebody, and that way the governor will be happy to know that that is the specific person, and so he won't have a lot of issues on KYC. AML will be a different conversation.
And eKYC?
But that's what Huduma number is. It's a digital number. So you're going to be able to check.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have also Nicholas Kimathi asking, the internet is an enabler to development and uptake of financial services. A lot of Kenyans are currently earning through internet-enabled platforms. Why is the cost and taxation of internet still high? Yet we know the huge role it plays.
I think it's subjective. The cost of internet in Kenya, if you look at the average, it's a daily internet, it's actually cheaper than a bottle of water in the country. So it's not that it is that expensive. I think it's that some people don't have the earning power, and therefore they feel that it's expensive. We spent a lot of time on the Ajira digital program, where we're looking at many of the young people who are working. And when we start with them, they initially will say bundles are expensive, but the day they start working, that's not even an issue for them anymore. They start talking about the devices and other areas. This issue of taxation is one that we've looked at. The 10,000 shillings that the CS of National Treasury mentioned is really not a tax. Many of those people that are working online feel like they are not legitimately working because they don't pay KRA in many cases. And so they try and hide. So what we did is we said, you can actually go to KRA, pay your 10,000 shillings a year, irrespective of how much you're earning. Even if you're earning 30 million shillings, all you will pay is your 10,000 shillings. That 10,000 shillings is money that goes into the Ajira fund, whose responsibility is to create more work. It's not even going to building roads. It's going back into exactly the same sector. But it means for those young people, now they have a KRA clearance, they can go borrow money, they can go and, online work is work. So they become legitimate workers. And that is why we introduced that tax, in quotes.
Alan Madoka is asking, how can the legislation framework of a country be changed to speed up and catch up with the speed of technological change, that is a blockchain etc., so that the law is not a stumbling block, but an enabler?
I'm not certain today where the law is a stumbling block. It's one of the areas we've been looking at. I think, when you make laws, they have to be robust. They have to be tested. You have to make sure that you have all the right information. There's a lot of citizen participation. I would really want to know what area there is a problem with the law. Because, for instance, if you're looking at blockchain, artificial intelligence, there's actually no law that is stopping you from implementing, unless you want us to put one. So there's no hindrance right now on innovation. Actually, when you now put the rules, that's when you stop innovation. So right now, people should be innovating, and legislatures will come and catch up and say, oh, no, there you've gone too far. Here are the new rules that we need to put in place. Because right now, there's nothing stopping anyone investing and implementing blockchain, implementing artificial intelligence. Those are open.
All right. Matthew Gamsa, my fellow moderator here as well, is asking, what is the role of government vis-a-vis the private sector in enabling the digitization of finance and of the wider economy?
The role of government is primarily policy and regulation. Implementation is private sector, and that's primarily what we have done. Yes, in some cases, government has invested, for instance, in Posta, invested in Telecom, or a few of these other institutions, but they operate largely as private sector. So the role that government plays and will continue to play is that of policy formulation and regulation, and we expect that the industry will take up the rest in terms of rolling out and implementing many of those policies, and the innovations and creating the jobs that need to be created.
All right. Yeah. We have also Nicholas Mutegi asking, how is Kenya government empowering youth to self-employ in fintech? Is government identifying innovative ideas? Is it training the youth? How exactly is it supporting the youth? And I know this is where you also can speak about their Ajira Digital?
So it's a great question. Free primary education, free secondary education. The government is providing, first of all, education at core. Right now, we're talking of the competency-based curriculum because it is critical that we continue to grow as a country, ensuring we have the right technologies, we're investing in efficient systems that will ensure we are, first class in our innovations and competitiveness. The digital learning program, the DLP or the laptop project, is one such example where we're ensuring that we are providing each class in standard 1 and so on the opportunity to use technology. Now we're going to be creating labs for the rest so that they can continue with technology and are going to be part of the innovators, people who are going to be now creating new things because technology is going to be a part of everyday life. We've extended that in ensuring that our educational institutions, right now Moi University and JKUR, are already involved in the assembly of many of these devices. We have the Presidential Digital Talent Program where we take many of the high-tech or the ICT-based graduates and we train them for 1 year. So we're taking about 400 every year. We train them, give them induction and internships which go on for 1 year, and then they're taken within the country. I think now we're at about 1,000 people. We've gone further now with the Ajira Digital Program, where we've been going around the country. We're setting up what are called constituency innovation hubs, where you have free Wi-Fi as well as devices that you can use to, one, be trained and educated on how you can go online and have different services, but at the same time you can use those for earning money when you go on the different platforms and start earning money. So there's a lot of investment that's going on in this area. We're working closely with CDF and members of parliament, as well as any other institutions that want to come and work with us in building these youth centers where we're creating the innovation centers. We're going further with the Ajira Digital. Now we've partnered with the MasterCard Foundation, where we're providing support in each of those centers for people to be trained on very specific skills. We've opened up our environment now, especially with the data protection bill, to ensure many companies are beginning to invest here, and many of these jobs are being created. The number one logistics company, their back end is actually here at Athi River, where they hire hundreds and hundreds of young people to identify those parcels. So those jobs are being created. But as I said, jobs are being created primarily in the private sector, and our role is to ensure we have the right policies in place.
Right. Even as we're winding up, of course, we have very good salutary effort from the government when it comes to the 100% transition. But the commercial rate, also capacity, sometimes is really, a nagging problem. Maybe you can comment on that, because we are talking about all these good initiatives which are passing through, the whole gamut, but the bottleneck will be the capacity to carry through.
Yes and no. I think, first of all, when we put the Huduma number in place, now we can know how many kids are going to actually come into Standard 1. Before, you open the doors, and as many as there come in, and eventually now you start building on the infrastructure, because you didn't know, you can't plan for what you don't know.
So this is course correcting.
So now we've actually gone and we've taken with the Huduma number, now we know the numbers. Actually before that with the NEMIS, this is the Education Information Management System, we registered over 9 million students. So we are able to now predict and identify what is required next year, how many people are transitioning and how much investment is required. So these investments are happening, the training is happening. Unfortunately, even as we train, for instance, some of the teachers, some retire and you have to retrain others. So it's a continuous process, it's not a one-off, and that is continuing. So we'll continue to see how we can improve and ensure that we have efficient services. But at the end of the day, private sector is also, involved. They are also getting involved in ensuring that the investments that are being done are beneficial even to them. So we're seeing growth all over it. So it's not only government alone, it's a private-public partnership to ensure that everyone is growing the country together.
Right. Lastly, the whole issue of corporate governance, I'll be remiss if I don't really ask you, because we're entering into this digital space And I wonder if also we are prepared. Someone was actually asking, are we mentally prepared digitally? The conversation that we had here today, it's a big issue. And of course, we know so many scandals might erupt along the way. But looking at the whole regulatory framework as well, and the issue of corporate governance, which is shaking into place, especially in Kenya, what will be your take, briefly?
So I'm in government, so I'm not sure if you mean corporate governance in government or out there. I can tell you that the president has a serious commitment right now on ensuring he fights corruption. And we're all working with him to ensure that, first of all, corruption is eliminated. And corruption is not only taking money, it's also giving work to that person as opposed to that person. It's also giving preference to this one as opposed to that. It's just ensuring that the systems are efficient and smooth so that everybody is able to benefit equally within the country. So there's a lot of investment in ensuring that that happens and that we take care of all the citizens in an equal way, in the way we assess. So I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, but even if you're in government, you have the Mwongozo Code as well, right? Where you can pick your cue as far as, governance is concerned as well. I don't know if maybe also we need to relook at the Mwongozo Code as we're winding up.
I think that's there in place. I think we're one government. The way Mwongozo has been structured is to say that you have a board and that board is independent, and all that actually is operating and is happening. That's why, the governor of Central Bank, he'll tell you he's independent. And even though there is oversight from the National Treasury, KRA is independent. Communications Authority is independent. I think the Mwongozo is not a negative thing. It's actually working in government. The key question is then, are we being more efficient? Are we spending our resources well and so on? And all these things are things that we continue to evolve, which is why you see us in Parliament being asked many questions, because that's again the oversight role that Parliament has. They set the budget, then they oversight what we're doing, so they are also checking. So I think within government, the structures that are required to ensure that we're operating above board and that we're doing the right things, they exist. Of course, the fourth estate, the media are there. They report many of the cases that are not being handled. So I think we're in a space that is working right now. The challenge is that, yes, there's corruption that is being seen. We need the judiciary to take action when the cases are taken there. And sometimes, as I mentioned, some of the fake news, the media needs to manage. But by and large, I think as a country, we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the CS of ICT,
Thank you very
John
much.
Musheru. Over to Wallace.